From the moment I saw her, I loved her.
The keys to his heart you will have to find for yourself.
Take me home now.
You have no shame at all. Who was the man?
What man? I was lost, that's all.
I want to give her everything. Be careful, my friend.
Woman's body found. Stabbed in the neck with a small knife.
That is not Julia.
Where is she? I want to kill her. You haven't forgotten me, have you?
The film begins with Julia, a woman in a prison cell, sharing her story with a pastor. She starts by describing Luis Vargas, a wealthy coffee plantation owner who wants a wife to complete his life and boost his social status. Avoiding the shallow women in his circle, Luis places an ad in American newspapers seeking a woman willing to marry and move to Cuba. Julia Russell, a charming and intelligent woman from Delaware, responds to his ad. Her letters captivate Luis, and after exchanging many heartfelt messages, they arrange for Julia to travel to Havana. Expecting a modest and plain woman, since Julia downplayed her looks and sent different pictures, Luis eagerly awaits her arrival. When Julia arrives, she stuns Luis with her beauty, grace, and confidence. She explains that she used the wrong photos to ensure her beauty wouldn't be the reason for marriage. Luis also confesses he lied about being a clerk at a coffee house and reveals he owns the plantation. Deeply attracted to each other, they marry almost immediately and celebrate with a dance. Julia's charm and stunning appearance win Luis's heart, but her arrival arouses suspicion in Luis's close friend and lawyer, Alan Jordan. Julia arrived at the house and told Luis she wanted to sleep in a separate room because she felt uncomfortable sharing a bed with him. Luis smiled and said he would join her when she was ready to share a room. They wished each other good night and went to bed. The next morning, Julia brought breakfast to Luis's room, and they chatted about coffee and love. Later, they visited a coffee farm, where Luis explained the coffee plants to her. They kissed, and in the next scene, they made love. That evening, they went to the theater. After the first act, Julia slipped behind the curtains, and Luis followed her. He saw her talking to a man. When Luis confronted the man, Julia heard the commotion, came to Luis, and tried to kiss him. Luis asked about the man, but Julia insisted she didn't know him. Later, Luis received a letter from his sister and asked Julia to write a reply. That night, Julia had a nightmare and woke up screaming. Luis comforted her, helping her calm down and go back to sleep. While doing so, he noticed scars on her back. The next day, as Luis was leaving for work, Julia ran after him, begging him not to go. She handed him a letter she had written for his sister, and Luis offered to post it. Julia mentioned she wanted to go shopping, and Luis realized she might need money. They went to the bank together, where Luis gave her full access to all his accounts. Julia's sister, Emily, hired a private investigator who later met Luis to ask about Julia. Luis told him Julia was fine and that they were married. The investigator requested to meet Julia to confirm her well-being. Luis invited him for coffee to meet Julia in person. At home, Luis noticed a lot of clothes Julia had bought. When he asked about the contents of her trunk, Julia claimed there was nothing inside and said she had lost the key. Luis wanted to open it, but Julia distracted him with a kiss and asked everyone to leave the room, saying she wanted to bathe with her husband. Luis informed her about the private investigator hired by her sister, but Julia became irritated by a bird's humming. Later, the maid found the bird dead and showed it to Luis, who grew suspicious and went to his room. Shortly after, a woman approached Luis, introducing herself as Emily Russell, Julia's real sister. She explained that the letter she received didn't match Julia's handwriting and claimed someone else wrote it. She showed the letter to Luis, confirming it wasn't from her sister. Alarmed, Luis rushed home to find Julia, but she had vanished, taking a significant amount of his money. Heartbroken, Luis realized Julia had been deceiving him. When he finally opened her trunk, he discovered photographs of the real Julia, whose pictures had been included in her letters. Luis then went to the bank, where the manager informed him that his wife had withdrawn nearly all his money, leaving only $51. Betrayed and distraught, Luis fell ill and contemplated ending his life. Later, while seeking comfort from another woman, Detective Walter Downs approached him. Downs, a skilled investigator of con artists, revealed that Julia Russell was actually Bonnie Castle, a wanted grifter with a history of crimes across continents. Luis offered Downs a large sum of money to find her. Downs advised him to move on and warned against chasing Bonnie. But Luis refused, declaring, "I want to kill her." Despite the betrayal, Luis remained obsessed and set out to find her, unable to let go of his love and anger. Luis teams up with Downs and begins a journey across Cuba. He follows leads to seedy bars, gambling dens, and brothels until he finds Julia in a remote port town. Although he initially wants to kill her, he cannot do it because he is still deeply in love with her and feels he cannot live without her. Julia confesses that she is Bonnie Castle and that she initially planned to con him. However, she insists that she genuinely fell in love with him. She begs for forgiveness and promises to change. Still in love, Luis forgives her. They reconcile, and Luis vows to help Julia escape her troubled past. They rekindle their relationship, but Julia's lies continue to haunt them. Later, Luis meets Detective Downs and asks about the real Julia Russell. Downs reveals that the real Julia was murdered on a ship and that the police are now searching for the fake Julia, who is a fugitive. Luis takes Julia to Cardenas, where they start a new life together. One day, Detective Downs visits Luis and asks about a woman matching Julia's description who boarded a train heading east. Luis denies knowing anything. Downs suggests grabbing a drink, so Luis directs him to a nearby cafe. After they leave, Luis becomes anxious, sneaks back to his house, and starts packing to flee. As Luis prepares to leave, he encounters Detective Downs in the house. Downs demands Julia, but Luis refuses and begs him to go. When Downs persists, Luis shoots him in a panic. Julia arrives and stops Luis from checking if Downs is dead. She tells Luis to book 2 train tickets and wait for her. After Luis leaves, Julia checks the dead man and removes his disguise. It turns out he is Billy, Julia's former lover, who had been pretending to be Detective Downs. Julia tries to escape, but Billy catches her and reveals that he switched the real bullets with fake ones the night Luis tried to kill her. Billy explains that they can con Luis further, since he's planning to sell his company and return with more money. Julia begs Billy to stop, arguing that Luis loves her. Billy insists they can use the money to start a respectable life with their children after this last job. Later, Luis returns home while Julia is eating dinner. He questions her about a man, but she claims she dealt with the body and asks about the tickets. She then invites him to bed, but Luis grows suspicious of how calm she is. Julia bids him goodnight, keeping Billy a secret. She still plans to con Luis for the rest of his money. Luis and Julia eventually move to a poor neighborhood to avoid attention. Luis tells Julia they'll leave for the train and collect the money the next morning. Julia suggests they try their luck at a casino instead, teaching him tricks to win. She convinces him this is their best chance for a better future. At the casino, Luis sits at a table while Julia circles around, signaling him after spying on other players' cards. Luis wins several games before the other players catch on to their cheating. A fight breaks out, and Luis is beaten unconscious and thrown out of the casino. The men turn on Julia and lock the doors, threatening her. Later, Luis leaves Julia, feeling betrayed. Billy moves in immediately and rekindles his relationship with Julia. Luis sells his company's shares, telling a friend he's fleeing because he killed a man and is now a fugitive. He boards a train to escape. Meanwhile, Billy carves a scar on Julia's back during an intimate moment. Later, Luis returns to Julia with the money from selling his shares. While having dinner, Julia pretends to be disturbed by a rat and leaves to buy poison. Suspicious, Luis follows her and discovers she's meeting Billy at a brothel. Listening from the shadows, he hears them planning to escape with his money. Billy wants to kill Luis, but Julia hesitates, not wanting to harm him further. Shaken, Luis returns home. When Julia arrives, he's whistling and casually asks if she bought the poison. Julia says she did and suggests they go to bed after she makes coffee. She then leaves the doors unlocked for Billy to enter. Luis drinks his coffee while asking Julia strange questions about how rats die from poison. He then mentions her meeting with Billy and demands to know how they plan to kill him. Julia denies meeting anyone, but when Luis pulls out his pistol, she confesses. She admits she initially started this to con him, but has genuinely fallen in love with him. Luis realizes she poisoned his coffee, but tells her he still loves her despite her betrayal, saying his life is meaningless without her. Then he drinks the poisoned coffee. Julia tries to stop him, knocking over a lamp in the process. Outside, Billy sees the light go out and enters the house. He searches for them, but realizes they've escaped. Billy tracks them to a hotel, where he confronts them. Holding a knife to Julia, Billy threatens her, but Luis pulls out his gun and shoots Billy. Billy collapses, and Julia takes the gun from Luis, instructing the hotel staff to call a doctor. To protect Luis from the police, she fires another shot at Billy to stage the scene. Later, Julia is in prison, awaiting execution. She asks the pastor if her sins can be forgiven, and he assures her they can. When the police come to take her to the gallows, they discover she has escaped. The scene shifts to Julia reuniting with Luis at a casino, where she helps him win at games. And that's how the movie ends. What did you think of this movie? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and press the bell icon for more amazing videos. See you next time.